Virginia's gun ban challenged in the courts, Minnesota legislators release a fraud report, and America's talking. This is the Center Square Daily for Friday, May 15th, 2026. I'm your host, Greg Bishop. Beginning July 1st, the sale and manufacture of certain types of semi-automatic firearms will be illegal, as will the sale of magazines capable of loading 15 rounds. That's after Virginia Governor Abigail Spanberger signed House Bill 217 and Senate Bill 749 Thursday. The Second Amendment Foundation immediately filed a lawsuit challenging that ban. Now, in a statement announcing the bill being signed, Spanberger said she signed it because, quote, firearms designed to inflict maximum casualties do not belong on our streets. Now, her move comes as the U.S. Supreme Court considers whether or not they'll take certain types of challenges to bans from other states. Now, in response to Virginia's ban being signed, Second Amendment Foundation Executive Director Adam Kraut said, the firearms and magazines banned in the Virginia law are not bizarre and unusual outliers. They're among the most commonly owned guns and magazines in the country. He went on to say they're owned in the tens of millions by peaceable Americans who use them overwhelmingly lawfully. He further said Virginia has now joined the minority of radical states to ban these constitutionally protected firearms, and in doing so, joined the club of states that the Second Amendment Foundation says they're suing over. SAF is joined in their lawsuits, McDonald versus Katz, by the National Rifle Association, Firearms Policy Coalition, and two private citizens. Now, Virginia becomes the 12th state or jurisdiction in the country to have such a ban. The fourth state to do so since Illinois passed a ban in 2023. A challenge to Illinois' law remains in the federal courts. Here's a list of the states that have banned semi-automatic firearms. California, way back in 1989, Connecticut in 93, Delaware recently in 2022, Hawaii back in 1992, but Illinois, Maryland, Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, Washington, and also Washington, D.C. Now, Rhode Island has a ban that goes into effect July 1st after being enacted last year, and Colorado has a ban going into effect August 1st after being enacted last year. Now, while the Virginia General Assembly chose not to adopt Spanberger's amendments, she said specifically carves out certain firearms frequently used for hunting. She did say she'll work with legislators to clarify that language. Now, another bill that she signed in Virginia Thursday is House Bill 229 and Senate Bill 173. The bills prohibit individuals from bringing firearms into hospitals and other healthcare facilities that provide psychiatric care. Virginia not the only states with other types of gun control measures working their way through the state houses. In Colorado, House Bill 1144, or the Prohibit Three-Dimensional Printing Firearms and Components Law, was signed by Governor Jared Polis after passing along party lines in the legislature there. Starting July, amateur 3D printing of guns or certain parts of a firearm will be banned, with first-time violations a misdemeanor and repeat offenses a felony. Also in Colorado, Senate Bill 43, it would have required gun barrels to be purchased in person at federally licensed arms dealers. Now, that faced wide opposition from gun rights advocates, and ultimately, that bill failed to be brought up in the House. In Illinois, state lawmakers looking to ban Illinoisans from carrying firearms while at the polls, citing a rise in political violence around elections. Gun rights advocates taking issue with that proposal, claiming the ban would be unconstitutionally prohibiting firearms in some private residences. House Bill 34 would ban the ability to carry a firearm in any building, property, or parking area of a polling location in Illinois, creating a 24th restriction on open carry laws in the state. Now, while state police officers would be exempt in Illinois, any other person discovered to be carrying a firearm at a polling place would be found guilty of a misdemeanor. Now, that bill, along with a proposed ban on handguns that would be defined as easily convertible from semi-auto to full auto, could come up before the end of scheduled session May 31st in Illinois. An Ohio legislator wants to impose criminal penalties on gun owners who fail to secure firearms, and the weapons are used by children who hurt themselves or another person. And the sponsor of that bill said that it's not a safe storage mandate to keep guns locked up. In Minnesota Thursday, a post from State Representative Drew Roach on X with a video attached showed that, quote, when House Democrats didn't get the vote they wanted in Minnesota on the most extreme gun-grabbing bill in the country, according to this representative, HF 5140, one of their own, he said, Representative Aisha Gomez, actually told Republican State Representative Elliot Engin to, and I'll paraphrase here, commit self-harm. Brewer said, this isn't debate, this isn't passion, this is deranged, toxic, and downright dangerous behavior from the same people, he said, who want to strip law-abiding Minnesotans of their constitutional rights. Now, these are, of course, among the various types of proposals that are being floated or approved across the country in state houses, and a lot of these facing challenges in the courts as they're being prepared. But as you see from the dockets for the U.S. Supreme Court, there's only 2 cases impacting the Second Amendment up for consideration. Wolford v. Lopez, about whether Hawaii's law making it a crime for a licensed concealed carry permit holder to bring a handgun onto private property open to the public, such as stores or restaurants, without the property's express authorization, that's being challenged as a violation of the Second Amendment. Now, that case was heard January 20th, and decision in that case is pending. Another Second Amendment case the U.S. Supreme Court has also already heard is United States versus Hamani, about whether the federal ban on firearm possession by anyone who is an unlawful user or addicted to any controlled substance violates the Second Amendment, as applied to the respondent who is a marijuana user. Now, those oral arguments were held March 2nd, and a decision is pending. Now, numerous other petitions raising Second Amendment issues, like challenges to other states' ban on certain types of semi-automatic firearms and capacities of certain types of magazines, also regulations about 18 to 20-year-old adults and whether they can purchase certain types of firearms, and a variety of other challenges, including sensitive place challenges, remain in the pipeline, have been relisted for conference, for possible consideration, or have been straight up denied. So we are waiting to see what happens with the U.S. Supreme Court on what kinds of Second Amendment decisions they'll make. They are in their conference today, this Friday, and we'll see what they push out coming up Monday when they release their orders lists. You'll be able to follow that along with all of us at thecentersquare.com. And now let's talk about ongoing concerns surrounding fraud and how your tax dollars are being used or abused. The Republican-led Minnesota House Fraud Prevention and State Oversight Committee adopted a report this week, concluding a 2-year review of alleged fraud across multiple state programs. The report summarized hearings that were held during the 2025-2026 legislative session, and joining us to discuss the report's findings is the Center Square reporter, Elise Apel. Elise, you talked with State Representative Kristen Robbins about this particular report. Give us an overview. Why did they have this report, and what is it ultimately telling taxpayers?
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Greg. So this story has been ongoing for a number of years, actually. So the committee was first started in 2025 and officially wrapped up on Wednesday. So on Wednesday, they officially released their majority 84-page oversight report. So the committee, which is led up by Republicans, has spent the last number of months looking into basically all levels of fraud throughout Minnesota state government. They've basically identified what they're calling an unprecedented pattern of fraud in Minnesota. And over the last 2 years, they've interviewed whistleblowers, they've done their own reports, they've talked to, called in different state officials to really be held accountable for all of this fraud that's happening in Minnesota that really has garnered national attention over the last couple months, but has really been an ongoing problem, as the report identified, for decades. Since 2019, they're saying that Walz officials knew that this was happening. So Representative Kristen Robbins, she's a Republican. She was chairing the committee, and we've had lots of conversations with her over the last couple months, but really in this final committee hearing, which was only an hour long, it was basically just to approve this report, she really outlined what they are now calling the anatomy of fraud. So as she said in the hearing, the report outlines the anatomy of fraud and the failure of the Governor Tim Walz's administration to take action on that fraud. So she's really highlighting some concerns that Republicans in the state have honestly had for a number of years.
Well, they've even taken their concerns all the way to the halls of the U.S. Congress, where
Right.
there have been multiple hearings based off those whistleblower reports that you raised, and these state representatives saying that there's some smoke here and they're finding some fire, and this report seems to solidify that.
Right, yeah, and Kristen Robbins, in kind of my conversations with her, she's talked about this is really concerning. The things that they are uncovering, she's talked about how she didn't even understand. She knew there was fraud going on, but in hearing all of this whistleblower testimony and all the information that she's received as chairperson of this committee, she has been blown away by the levels of fraud. She's called it systematic webs of fraud of people. She's detailed cases. They uncovered cases where people were accused and charged with committing fraud in one sector of welfare or taxpayer-funded programs, and then would just move to a different sector and would open up a program in that sector and do the exact same thing. There were basically no checkpoints to see, are these people criminals that are opening these programs, and just no checkpoints within the system. And she's
in your conversation with her, she said that they did review a whole bunch. I think the quote here is, there are many vectors of fraud that we didn't even get to, and that's concerning. So are they done looking at these things, or are there still more rocks to overturn and to help taxpayers find out where their money went?
Right, yeah, so that's the really interesting thing about this committee, is it was basically formed just because there's a tie currently in the Minnesota House. So there's a tie between Republicans and Democrats, and kind of as per their power sharing agreement, Republicans were able to get this committee formed. And what Robbins told us is she really does not believe, unless there's some real power change in the state government, unless Republicans take control, she does not see this committee being reformed under Democrat control. And that was something that was actually really interesting, and I wanted to highlight from that last committee hearing, was really Republicans' response to the majority report, which they did not sign off on. And they had the opportunity to do a minority report and actually turned that down. They refused to do a minority report. And Representative Robbins was very disappointed in that. But basically their response to everything the majority report found was just, this is wrong. This is what we've discovered is not correct. And this whole committee has just been an opportunity for Republicans to call out Democrats. And that was kind of their only response to everything that this report uncovered.
And just a couple of bullet points that you seem to kind of distill down what the report says. And essentially by 2019, in the Child Care Assistance Program in particular, the Walz administration was aware of significant fraud and failed to act. Do we know how much fraud there was? I mean, we've seen estimates upwards to several $1 billion.
Yeah, so kind of conservative estimates are $9 billion. But upwards of $20 billion is what some reports are saying. So this is massive levels of fraud. And really the Democrats' responses that I've kind of seen as throughout my coverage of this issue is, there's fraud everywhere. There's frauds throughout all state governments. Why are we just calling out the fraud that's happening in Minnesota? But really what this committee and Representative Robbins is pointing to is that the fraud happening in Minnesota is actually unprecedented. This is webs of fraud unlike anything that we've seen in any other states. And the levels of it are just incredible when you take in consideration everything that money could have been spent on, all of that, the taxpayer funding that could have gone to, and other issues in the state that was just, basically drawn out of the system, and in some cases went to funding terrorist groups. As we saw, the story that really broke open this story on fraud in Minnesota back in November was that the funding was being pulled from these taxpayer-funded programs and sent to a terrorist group, and that's really unbelievable.
It's pretty remarkable. And again, yes, this is just Minnesota. We're not talking about California or Illinois or New York. This is just the fraud report from Republicans in the Minnesota House highlighting these troubling concerns. What kind of accountability will there be, right? I mean, you've heard the governor say in the past that they knew about this and they're going after it. You've heard the attorney general in the past say that they're going after bad actors here, but at least help me understand, what is that accountability going to be? Are taxpayers any closer to recovering those funds that they are seeing here being reported that were fraudulently used? Are they any closer to having those funds returned after this new report from Minnesota Republicans?
It really seems like it'll take the voters actually speaking for anything to come of this, and that was Representative Robbins' point. Actually, she said very little is being done, and this is what they actually touched on this on their last meeting as well, because Democrats pointed to, that the Attorney General is trying to get some of this funding back, and apparently it's just in the hundreds of millions, if even that is what he's actually been able to recover. Even with all of these reports, it seems like there's been very little legal action taken, and in a lot of the cases, it's hard to even know what can they do. How do you get money back from a terrorist group or from the car that they bought with the taxpayer funding? How does the government or the taxpayers recoup that funding? It seems like a lot of it has disappeared into thin air, and it really seems like there'll be very little accountability besides maybe some of these people going to jail.
We'll be watching that closely, as I know you will as well. Thank you so much to Elise Apel, the Center Square reporter, keeping an eye on what's going on in Minnesota with the ongoing concerns about how tax dollars are being fraudulently used. Now it's time for America's Talking, with headlines from across the country that you can find in the description below or in your inbox with the Center Square newsletter, free at thecentersquare.com. Louisiana Secretary of State Nancy Landry is reminding voters in her state that races and propositions scheduled for Saturday will proceed as planned, except for U.S. House races, which have been canceled and moved to the fall election cycle. State officials said all voters will still have items on their ballot, including the race for U.S. Senate and 5 constitutional amendments. The Center Square Louisiana editor, Misty Castile, reports candidates for U.S. House seats must qualify in August. The primary election for those races set for November 3rd, with the general election scheduled for December 12th, if needed. Votes cast in the canceled May 16th and June 27th U.S. House races are void and will not be counted. While some ballots may still display those races, election officials are prohibited from releasing any results. All other scheduled races and propositions will continue as planned. The U.S. Department of Justice has created a new task force to fight healthcare fraud in 3 western states. The Center Square contributor, Zachary Schmidt, reports the West Coast Healthcare Fraud Strike Force will focus on California, Arizona, and Nevada. Assistant Attorney General Colin McDonald of the DOJ's Fraud Division said data shows the states have been seeing a significant and accelerated increase in healthcare fraud. Other officials said they're targeting billions of taxpayer dollars from federal healthcare programs. Arizona's Attorney General Chris Mays told the Center Square about a 2023 case where $2.5 billion of taxpayer money was stolen from the state's Medicaid program by directing Native Americans to unlicensed or fraudulent sober living homes and then billing the state for inadequate services that never occurred. The state recovered only $125 million, or about 5% of that $2.5 billion in taxpayer money lost to that fraud scheme. Michigan House Republicans passed a resolution calling on Michigan Secretary of State and Democratic gubernatorial candidate Jocelyn Benson to release records tied to her past involvement with the Southern Poverty Law Center following a federal indictment against that organization. The Center Square reporter Elise Apel reports House Resolution 313, introduced by Republican State Representative Rochelle Smith, urges Benson to voluntarily disclose any information in her possession related to the SPLC's operations and alleged financial ties to extremist groups. Benson did not respond to the Center Square's request for comment on the resolution. Now, that resolution comes after federal prosecutors announced charges against the SPLC last month, including wire fraud, bank fraud, and conspiracy to commit money laundering, alleging that the group directed more than $3 million in donor funds to individuals associated with extremist organizations. Benson served on the SPLC's board of directors from 2014 through early 2019, overlapping with part of the time frame outlined in that indictment. And some of Wisconsin's education and business groups are on the same page after the death of the state's proposed $1.8 billion tax deal. The National Federation of Independent Businesses in the state said that lawmakers let a chance for meaningful tax reform slip through their hands. The Center Square contributor Benjamin Yount reports the Wisconsin Assembly Wednesday approved the plan that would have sent rebate checks to taxpayers. The tax deal would also have spent about $300 million to buy down local property taxes, and the plan would have ended taxes on tips and overtime in the state. Not a single Democrat in the Wisconsin Senate voted for the plan, and 3 Republicans also voted against it. Now, the Wisconsin Association of School Boards said that it wasn't a cure-all, but it was a moment of bipartisan cooperation to benefit kids and taxpayers alike. They asked lawmakers to give it another try. A second vote looks unlikely. From my studios in central Illinois, I'm Greg Bishop, and you can join us back here for more stories impacting you, the taxpayer, from all around the country, only with the Center Square Daily.